Hey folks, Steve here with another Nations in Arms video. We are going to be looking at the year 1812 in this video. This will be potentially a very important year, or it could be a very big bust. I figured I'd just start recording here. I think there's a very important die roll that needs to be shown on camera because it's really going to decide much of the game. So it didn't make sense. Like, you guys got to see it. If it totally goes foobar, you will have seen it on camera and we will all laugh. Couple of things over the course of the production turn from 1811 to 1812. We have seen basically France enjoy the continental system to great effect. And it's really, I guess, the incentive for France to indeed win the War of Liberation, crush Portugal, have already gotten Prussia and Austria and Russia into the continental system at some point. Is that you get all the money from the trade points, whether they're blockaded or not, because it's all internal land-based trade. Now, whether or not that seems overpowered to you, I don't know, but that is apparently the rule, even in the 2019 rulebook update. So, indeed, France did enjoy the continental system for production and had a total whopping production of 160 something production, which meant that they could really build out their entire force pool, which is why you see still a number of units scattered about all over the place, even along the Atlantic wall, holding critical ports, and then the armies themselves, which I guess that's something we're going to have to watch out for as France, that, you know, we want to hold all this territory, we want to hold all these things together, that thins us out fighting the Russians or the Austrians or the Prussians or whatever. But it's to make sure that Britain can't become a spoiler and drop something along the coast somewhere and cause a bunch of mischief. We have at least something that serves as a wall for them to deal with and attrit them away. Because Britain is not getting a whole lot of money, they actually had to make a tough decision. They built a couple of steps to beef up their main army in Britain, and then proceeded to save $24, pounds, whatever, for diplomacy, with the idea that they're going to spend 12 trying to get Russia. If for some reason they don't get Russia in spring, they will try to get Russia in the summer. If they manage to get Russia in the spring, then they're going to use that money to try to influence Prussia to betray the French Empire, which would be pretty devastating, back-to-back turns doing that. They only have enough money to make one major attempt a turn, but they can do it across the spring and summer turns. And those are really the turns that are going to matter the most to try to get it to happen, and could really flip the script on France. The only thing being that they really only have one major army hanging out to dry in Poland, and even then they would be in supply for Poland's capital. And then much of the French army is actually coming from the west here. So it's not a complete disaster, but it would make things pretty chaotic if it works out that way. I'll also point out, I made a little bit of a mistake. So last turn, we had a foreign war for Spain. That is technically still ongoing and can only possibly be ended during the winter phase of this year. And I could not have played the third Rome card until now. And so I did decide to go ahead and make that the public event card that was played. You can only have one foreign war card played per turn. Per year, rather, I think. So I could not have played third Rome in 1811, but I could play it now. And so we did. And those forces that had been pulled off by Russia are still pulled off. The interesting thing is, while France's entire force pool is basically built out to some degree, there's a few corps that are missing a step. Russia has basically everything on the board, including a crap ton of militia and detachments, which are now garrisoning city fortresses across the motherland, so to speak. So Russia is about as big and strong and scary as it could possibly be for this big show here. However they decide to handle it, Britain has invested all of Russia's money building it out completely and entirely, and we will see how that goes. I think with that, so the cards are played. In 1813, France keeps getting a bunch of cards. They are now getting tons and tons of cards. to use at their leisure for whatever they want to do, many of which they will not want to play, but there will be this card that will get played eventually. It's a public card, so it has to get played, but because it's a foreign war card, we have to hold on to it, I think, until a new year has passed. So 1813, when we'll play the USA card, which basically represents the War of 1812. So Britain will have to send some stuff away to a foreign war soon, but not this year, just the way the cards are coming out. Okay, so that's the big thing, all that explained, and now we're going to go to the very important diplomacy role. I've already done the minor diplomacy roles, which have all amounted to basically nothing, though France did try to get Egypt on their side just to increase their continental system even more, but did not occur. So here's the dealio. We're going to spend 12 of Britain's money on the attempt. They are targeting Russia once again. So we're paying 4 to attempt a major power diplomatic influence by Britain. We get a +2 by spending 8 more. So that's how we get the 12 spent. So 4 and 8. So it's a +2 bonus, and then a +2 for the natural national modifier that Russia is predisposed to being agreeable to Britain. So that is a +4 to the die roll. We need at least an 8 for this to happen. So we're gonna roll it. If France is gonna laugh, because here's the other thing: you have to do declarations of war before influencing, and France is not ready to invade Russia yet. They're still moving forces to the east. So if this die roll fails, France can laugh and just wait until next turn, and we'll see what happens. So here comes the die roll, and that is a 7. 7 + 4 is not enough. That is not enough. So Russia continues to maintain its neutrality. It is armed to the teeth, but no action. And to be honest, I'm thinking when we go into the summer turn, I don't think France declares war on Russia either. We want to keep making Britain spend to influence Russia, or try to get, Prussia. But if they only flip Prussia, basically the French forces are going to curb stomp the Prussians. So it's putting the British basically in a vice grip that they have to do something. They have to get Russia on their side, and they're just not doing it. They're just not doing it. Actually, scratch that. I'm wrong and full of crap. I'm full of crap. You want to know why? The Grand Duchy of Warsaw has been created. That is true. That is true. Which gives another +1. Which means that Russia is in. I'm totally full of crap, guys. I thought that failed, and I'm wrong. I need to read the fine print of various things. Various things. I'm going to double check the Warsaw thing. Grand Duchy of Warsaw. I think of it as Poland in my head, so it might be the situation. Yes, okay, that makes sense, actually. So I guess this, once more, we look at the system working pretty well. A average die roll of 7, which is what you're going to get the most on the bell curve of a 2d6, will bring Russia in, assuming Britain is spending the money. So +2 for the money spent, 2 for the nationality bonus for Britain, +1 for the fact that Warsaw does exist, because we have Poland as a minor ally of France. That is a +5 to the die roll. 7 + 5 is 12. Russia is in it. So there you go, guys. I'm sorry I screwed that up. I'm a little worried that maybe Russia should have joined in 1810, but you know what? This is just as well. So Russia joins the coalition. Both sides are now at war with one another, as opposed to history, where Napoleon had spent a lot of time prepping his armies in Prussia and Poland and the edge of Austria to invade Russia. Instead, that time was spent crushing Spain and Portugal. So the French armies are a little behind the curve. Whether or not that's enough for the Russian army to the forces of Russia to overrun Poland and Prussia, well, we'll see here this turn. So what I'll do here, I'll do the same as I usually do. I'm going to start playing through the chits in the cup, and we'll see how things play out. And I'll, given how much action is going to be underway, I may show the aftermath of fewer chits than I have been in the last video, because I think there's going to be a lot of activity here. But Britain can breathe a sigh of relief. They do not stand alone. They have Russia on their side, fighting the good fight. So yeah, let's see what happens. Okay, this is the spring of 1812 with a few chits played, just a few where each side has gotten a go, but the luck has been a little more French side, as it usually is, apparently, as always when I'm playing this game. The very first chit pull was a French naval, which, from the ships that France had built, managed to clear out some French ships and then had enough movement to return to Brest with basically just a handful of British naval units out towards the Iberian Peninsula being a nuisance. But effectively, the French fleet is prepared to go for the Channel and continuing to keep Britain on its hind feet. The fact that we had 2 British fleets sunk, this impulse is a damper on the British situation for sure. So I think that's going to be a pretty significant challenge for the British to deal with. So we'll see how else it goes. I mean, the additional naval chits are not in, so that was the only British move. That was the only French naval move. The British will get to go, and they can still potentially drop Wellington somewhere to cause mischief, but it's still hard to tell, like, where does it make sense to do that. Maybe we go down to Italy, to be honest, and we start to liberate Naples or something like that. I mean, that's a conceivable option to try to make some inroads against the French. Off to the east, the French got to go first with the land 2. That led to some very dangerous maneuvering on the part of Davout, but basically we moved an Austrian army up here to put some zone of influence down, and then Davout moved up. He did get intercepted by the Russian army that we were going to put out a supply, and he thought he did win, and in fact rolled well enough to destroy the Russian army. It was a major battle. Cards were used. Davout came out pretty far ahead on that one. But the losing Russian army did roll pretty well and inflicted some pretty serious casualties on the army of Germany, which is, again, the army here. They still have the first Russian army here that could be a danger. What the Russians were hoping was for an interception and then a march to the sound of guns, and basically have 2 Russian armies against Davout. But the march to guns failed. Really what we had done is we tried to intercept first, failed, second interception succeeded, march to guns failed. So it could have been much better for the Russians. It just didn't work out that way. We then had the Prussian army move out of Königsberg against the other Russian army right here. And in that battle, the Russians actually did win. Though it wasn't, they both suffered a few step losses and the Prussians retreated. This would have put them in a really bad spot to basically be knocked out of supply and potentially in danger of being crushed in the follow-up chit pull. But the coalition land 4 chit was drawn, which meant that the Russian armies couldn't activate. We did pull a corps from St. Petersburg all the way down here to be a supporting force led by a 4-rank leader, 4-initiative leader. Probably want him to take control of one of the armies if we can get him in there via some mechanism. But so just as far as it goes right now, I think Russia's had a hard time of it and some bad chip pulling luck. They're certainly not out for the count, but one of their 3 armies has been destroyed. Meanwhile, Napoleon is still bringing up the rear, heading east, trying not to take attrition. He will be in the theater of operations in summer, probably, to kind of help bolster whatever is going to go on. I don't expect the French forces and its allies to make a deep penetration into Russia during the spring. If nothing else, it's really just help defend Poland, try to hurt the Russians where they can, and then push into Russia after that. But as you can see, there's still a lot of detachments, Cossacks out there that could be a big pain in the butt. So whether or not it makes sense to ever push that hard into Russia, I think is kind of the real key question. If we were to conquer Russia, it is conceivable that we would win some sort of automatic victory. I'm going to have to double check that, but that's kind of the stakes right now. So I'm going to go back. The next land ship should be a French one, and we'll just keep rolling through the end of the turn. Okay, here we are at the end of spring. The spring turn ended a little bit early with the winter quarters draw, but I'd say that France feels pretty good about where they've gotten. So yeah, the one Russian army had been destroyed, and then both of the other ones have been thoroughly smashed, actually reduced to, I think, like 1 step each, and they're basically on the retreat at this point, moving off, trying to get to the other side of the rivers, and hoping that they can play, trade space for time and find opportunities to cut the French out of supply when they actually venture into Russia. I probably should have done a better job of simply retreating, but I don't know. So this is the tough thing. The battles were such that the Russians either tied on modifiers, or in a couple of cases they were ahead, but the attrition of the battles have reduced them heavily, and the counterpunches have just put them in really bad shape. So while they'll certainly be looking to do the cutting off of supply and trying to attrit these guys, it still remains to be seen just how bad that's going to go for the French. Now, there are modifiers for Russia in terms of the attrition rolls, so that, that will probably be a factor over time. I think the Russians are feeling pretty bad because, again, their counter punch capability is just gone. So everything they're going to be doing from here on out will be based on, a very basic single step unit trying to create supply problems, shoestring budget situation, which is not good. Britain is preparing for some way to get Wellington onto the continent somewhere as if not a distraction, at least something to start making inroads against the French economy. So the most obvious place is probably going to be, I think, Naples, and just come down here and attack an open spot. So they're kind of gearing up for that in summer to be able to do that. But overall, not looking good for Russia. Now, the thing was, right, I could look at it and should have said, I don't even want to fight on equal terms as Russia. I should just retreat. Let them have Vilna, let them have, all these places, and just simply retreat out into the open field. The only problem was that in a couple of cases, the Russians did try to get out of the way, and they failed. So it's tough to say. They did take Königsberg, and now the Polish are trying to siege it back. And the rest of the reinforcements are kind of plodding along through Prussia. So there will be a very general advance. The question is going to be, can Britain do anything about it? And I think they have an option. I'm not sure what happens if they flip Prussia right now. What happens? To be honest, I don't think it's a very good calculation because one, the French are ensuring that they have units near Berlin. Napoleon's smack dab there in the middle. The only coherent fighting force of the Prussians is off to the east. And so long as the French can control them, right, like even if Prussia flipped just this next turn in summer, like these guys pop into Berlin, and then Napoleon proceeds to smash his way forward, and Davout, turns on Blucher or something. And I don't think it does a whole lot of good, right? Like I think what probably ends up happening is Prussia gets conquered, the French units continue to maintain a line. They're just fighting with just the French against the Russians, and Prussia's basically out of the game again. That that's probably what happens here if Britain tries to turn Prussia right now. So I'm gonna have to think about, is it worth spending the money to flip them now, and does that do them any good? But we'll start looking at the summer turn here next, and decide. It's not even a guarantee that the British could flip Prussia right now, but they got to spend the money to try it. It's just not clear, if they would basically have maybe a +3 to the die roll, which it's conceivable they could do it. But again, the positioning is just not great. Like I don't know what else could be done. We probably would rather flip them in winter, so we may wait for that, because then if they flip in winter, they can survive winter, or maybe they survive spring. I don't know. It's tough to decide this stuff, guys. So I'm going to try to figure out. I think we're at the point now where Russia's gotten clocked pretty good. France is feeling good. It's about like if you're in Britain's shoes, what do you do? Right? Do you try to get the Prussians to backstab the French, despite the fact that the French are still doing, reasonably well, and Austria is still weak? Is it worth the gamble? And is it enough to change the outcome? At the very least, it keeps Russia from falling, maybe, because now Prussia is its own little foobar situation, but it's not looking good. And very generally, the French can still trace their own supply line, I'd say for the most part via Polish units and such, that it just doesn't seem like a good idea. I don't know. Okay, here we are a lot of the way through the summer turn. Wellington has landed, taken Naples, is currently in Rome, probably getting things situated so that the Pope is restored as an independent country, taking it from France. Though currently the French army of Spain, with Massena at its head, has been rushed south from his direction towards Russia to represent the defense of Italy. So he's made it down, rushing. He took some attrition. And I will say attrition is starting to take its toll. As we look to the east, the activation markers are kind of covering things up, but I've got a whole sea of Austrian detachments swarming and taking out Cossacks. So it's like the one strategy I can use is the Austrians, because I have a bunch of detachments that the British let be built for the free steppes. They're still kind of useful because you can assign leaders to them and you can move detachments around and try to make something of them. And they're useful for basically creating a no retreat path on the Cossacks. You can kind of see there was a Cossack here, now no longer. This guy's in trouble. He's probably going to sneak away, but certainly we want to try to keep him bottled up, because we just don't want there to be any way for the Russians to hold ground here. We want to keep pushing east as much as we can, and just at least take maybe Kiev and maybe this fortress there. In the north, Prussia is pushing on St. Petersburg, and there is now a Russian army that can activate, but only has a few steps in it and is out of supply. Getting back into supply is going to be very difficult, and we're screening the supply line of the Prussians such that it's going to be hard for them to make do here. We'll very likely see probably not in summer, but like fall is going to be the opportunity to try to make a push. I think the key thing is that the uh, the Imperial forces want to get into a position, if they can't get Russia into a surrender state, be in a position such that the reinforcements are going to be, far away, ideally. But I think since they've conquered Finland, that could pose a problem, and it could be a reinforcement place for Russia. And we'll have to calculate what the Russian production will be at that point. They're definitely going to be hampered, that's for sure. So it's a struggle. Wellington had to come here, had to take Naples, because otherwise the continental system would be in place for 2 winter turns. So now that is not going to happen unless Massena can get in there and stop Britain. So this is the Britain stops France from winning the game gambit, and then and the British are going to try to ship some reinforcements down to them from Britain here soon. And then, yeah, Russia is just trying to hang on. I think the fact that there was a couple of times where the Russians didn't get away and they got caught up in the French leaders who had better initiative really hurt them. Obviously, the destruction of armies is awful, and it's probably going to cost the Allies the game. I think if I got a little cavalier about taking Königsberg, and I really shouldn't even have bothered to do that. I really should have started to fall back. If fall back as much as I needed to, get it back across the rivers, and basically play raider on the supply lines. And because I defended too far front, and people who play World in Flames will know how bad that is for Russia. Again, I keep making references to World War II in this campaign. I think that's the failure of the Russians, is just that situation. But they could come back if they can make it through the year and still have Moscow. If they can still hold on to St. Petersburg, those things might matter. Kiev matters, but it kind of matters less if you don't have Moscow. So, and Moscow's still pretty far away. The closest army is an Austrian army, which is at Vitebsk here, and they would probably move to go to Smolensk, and then probably leave some detachments behind and start marching just straight out towards Moscow to take it. So that's kind of what they're hoping to achieve. The question about, does Britain try to flip Prussia to the coalition? I think the only time that it makes sense to do it right now is the winter turn, and then they have to. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that they can do it. If they were to flip them now, what would happen is there's French units in Berlin. That's a trigger condition. They don't own Warsaw. And then Königsberg would flip to be coalition controlled, but we have a stack right on top of it, and we have French units nearby that they could very likely just cause Prussia to surrender, even if they flipped. And it probably by the time winter is done, the Prussians aren't making it back down south. So Prussia would be conquered again. And, that's just kind of it, right? Prussia gets conquered again, and they get pieced out, and they probably get pieced out for the rest of the game at that point. Prussia is done. So I don't think Britain, even in winter this year, I don't think they can afford. I don't know. I just don't think they can afford to do it. If the Russians were defeating the Prussians more, I think it'd be more reasonable. But I think this game is going to go to the French hardcore. So somewhere Wellington's going to roll in his grave, and Napoleon's spirit's doing a high five on this one, guys. I feel like that's what's happening. At best, the Russians are trying to keep ships in the Baltic so that the Swedish can't drop an army in Finland. They could, the Swedish army could go the long way around, but gosh, that's going to take a long time, and supply is going to be a real bitch. So I don't think we can even do that. But anyway, I'm going to keep playing through summer. We'll see what else happens. I think we're getting to the, like, how much more can happen here. Um, there is actually one thing that the coalition is prepared to do now. Every enemy force located in one of these three areas undergoes an attrition check. So I think that is going to be the thing to do right now, and hopefully bleed away much of the Imperial force. So I'm going to play that card probably next, and then we'll see what else can happen there. Okay, here are things as we're beginning to start the autumn turn. So again, you can see the Russians starting to pull back, trying to get something into Kyiv so that they can hold something against the onslaught. And it is very tough to figure out, like, what can we do to make a real difference here. The other hope would be, I mean, I don't even know who's in a better position right now. If Austria betrays France, then that could be better. It may be worth a shot more than the Prussians, but we have to wait. We really have to wait until winter. Well, actually, Austria would maybe be a good way to go, because it's been a year since they were into a mandatory alliance. I mean, there's a +1, so we have a total of +3. And right now, the French are not occupying Prussia. And by the time the Prussians make headway, by the time the French would make headway against Austria with autumn and winter coming in, this would basically mean, well, it's hard to say. We really want Austria to have a production so that they can start making a drive into the French lines, maybe cut off supply. So I do think, let me think about this for a second. If we were to influence Austria and succeed, the Austrian army, if the coalition would go first in the turn, we could trap Davout's army and deal it a crushing blow. Napoleon would be stuck trying to move. This is where the game is going to get really chaotic, when we start flipping with the mandatory alliances. Prussia, I just don't think makes sense. They would get pieced out, and then Britain would be out of money, and there would be, basically the Austrian picked production, and then from here on out, France would only have to fight Austria and Russia, if anything, if we were to try to pull Prussia in. The French have just set up too good. So I think, let's see. Well, I'm going to wait until winter, and we'll see what else can happen here. But we're going to try to make something happen, I think. But we'll play through autumn, and we'll see what the end results are. But this could be, we're kind of in this really tough spot where, like, the Austrians are actually in a good position to get to Moscow. Maybe this fall turn, maybe in winter. And the Prussians likewise could potentially get into St. Petersburg, and that's going to be all she wrote, and France would win the game potentially, or at least, well, I don't know. The rules are going to get sticky here, and I think it's going to be really on Britain to try to flip the script on France, and I don't think France is going to win an automatic victory at this rate. If they win at all, but we'll see. So Let me play through autumn. We'll see what else occurs and go from there. Britain will wait to roll until winter, because I think that's the only time that makes sense. Well, autumn ended pretty early, unfortunately for France. So you can see where we've taken Kiev. We've actually taken St. Petersburg as well. The Prussians have taken it. They've moved in and taken the fortresses in Finland. Napoleon himself just took one of the minor fortresses. So in the west, there's really only Novgorod left, and then all the other fortresses of Russia are really in the east or the southeast. Moscow is just a few hexes away from flying columns of the French. Had they gotten another activation, they probably would have been in Moscow, and that would have been a conquer state for Russia. Now, they probably would have said, we are going to fight on, and then they would get some spring production and things would get pretty interesting. But I don't know that. Well, we'll have to see what happens here. I think very generally, the situation is, it's hard to say. Like, it truly, the attrition of Russia has attrited much of these sort of imperial armies down to the nubs, and why we're spread out as much as possible to avoid attrition. And so far that's worked out okay, especially with the cavalry rushing across the plains, with Russia really trying to hold it together with a few detachments, and militia, because they're just kind of out of gas now. Now, when we go to do production, I'm not sure how much Russia will be able to build, but then consider that Britain can probably funnel tons of cash Russia's way to try to prop them up, and they'll be building whatever armies they can in the southeast. So it's kind of interesting, how this is going to go, because it really feels difficult. Like, imagine if the French had not destroyed the Russian armies, right? Like, how much harder would this be? Just taking territory is exhausting for these stacks. You definitely need to separate out. Moving around doom stacks is a good way to lose units, but then it's hard to walk around with just single core running around the map. It is tough. You got to use your leaders carefully. As it stands, we're still in an interesting position here, all things told. We're going into the winter turn, and this is kind of the turn of event here, because again, I don't know that flipping Prussia right now, how much that changes the game. I do think if Austria changes, then it's a big deal. And the problem is the French are sitting on the winter campaign card, which means that basically the French can ensure that the rest of the turn plays out very long, and could give them enough time to kind of screw over the Austrians, which certainly could happen. But the coalition player doesn't know that, I guess, and I have to be careful. Like, playing the winter card, France basically guarantees that they'll have enough movement to get to where they want to be, and that's kind of it. So does Britain influence Prussia or Austria, I think, is the big question. And again, I think Austria is the better choice, because France is simply very likely going to have conquered Prussia, and any Prussian return back home is going to be intercepted by Napoleon, and that basically shuts off one whole big front, and then France can focus on I don't know. Honestly, guys, this is really tough, because if Prussia fights on, they do get production, and then they can build in Kustrin or Kolberg, and even the Prussians could maybe get some supply from their buddies and trying to get home. I don't know, guys. This is really tough. I thought I was going to be able to make a decision on camera. I need to think this through a bit more. Okay, so I think what I want to do, I'm going to try Austria, and that will give us time to basically build up Austrian forces and really aim them into basically build up some armies and kind of come into the soft spot here of Germany that doesn't have armies in it. Try to pull these Austrians back as the coalition, and then just do what we can after winter is over, with the hope that really the French and the Prussians are not in a position to really do much more damage. Yeah, I think that's what we got to do. So the way this works when you're trying to flip a faction that is in the mandatory alliances, you spend money like you're influencing a major. So Britain's going to spend 4 for that. They're going to spend 8 to get the +2. But the target of the diplomatic action is actually France and not Austria, and so you don't get the Austrian bonus to the die roll. So it's 4 to attempt, 8 for the +2. Then we get a +1 because it's been 1 year since the mandatory alliance started. Right, we're in the winter of 1812, so technically we're at that. So it's only a +3 to the die roll. So we're going to give it a shot. We're going to spend Britain's money, knowing that we're going to get more money in the spring in 1813. And we got an 8 plus 3 is 11 is not enough. Not enough. So Austria remains in a mandatory alliance. Britain spent out its money and will go to play the final winter turn. I think we will go ahead and have France play the winter campaign card. Wherever it is, I have it in here. Nope, that's not it. Where is it? I've got a whole big stack of cards. Here it is, winter campaign. Play that, and we'll see what else goes on. Yep, all right. Play through winter, maybe see Russia. Russia would be conquered and then would probably choose to fight on. That's probably what's going to happen, but we'll see. Okay, here we are at the end of winter. Gone ahead and played through again. The winter campaign card allow us to play through every chit. And so I'll start in the south. Wellington started to push Massena back into Tuscany, was doing quite well. But the fights were starting to get a bit attritional, and then he bit off more than he could chew. And Massena managed to knock him out. And while I guess technically Britain's going to get Naples back because they do have Naples under control, the papacy will stay in the French Empire. But that will critically keep the continental system from being in place 2 years in a row. So that victory condition is out for the French because there's only going to be a couple more of these left. I guess conceivably we could see Massena come down, but I think the British are going to have to reinforce Naples a lot next turn after spring and do what they can. Meanwhile, in Russia, it's pretty wild to see, the Prussians have occupied the Baltic coast and gone into Finland. What I've also done, and this is maybe where things get a little gamey again, but I think, if you look at it as a design, design for effect, it kind of works out where, since we've done so well, I'm sending Prussian army off to the middle of Finland to attrit away pretty heavily, where he's only got a couple steps left. He's out of supply. It's going to take him time. So the idea being, and you can see we also put some Prussian detachments kind of way out of the way where we could. The whole idea being, if Prussia flips, France is in a perfect position to occupy Prussia and basically force their surrender, and they've got no other forces on the board to work with. We've denuded their force, and because we're going to be in control of their production this year, Prussia's probably not going to build anything. That's probably what I'll just do. They get 3 free steps, but I will figure out a way to make that as useless as possible for them by putting steps into the Prussian army in Finland and then building like a detachment somewhere where it can just get stomped pretty easily by the French forces. We do have a French supply line from, here and looping through Poland. We can get it out to basically Vitebsk. So while Austria remains our ally, we have a clear supply line to Moscow. If for some reason Austria flips on France, France has a decent chance of reestablishing that that supply line to Moscow, and then we'll have to figure out how to get into St. Petersburg and or Kiev with French units or whoever our other, ally is. So it does make it a little more, it does increase the value of flipping Austria as a coalition, but we have a lot of Austrians occupying Ukraine. There are a couple of Russian units left, by the way. They're way out here beyond the Don, but you can see everywhere else. We got the control markers. Those are fortresses. There's definitely a strategy there to, if you think you're in good shape, go ahead and spend the steps to occupy and reactivate the fortress, because that's going to allow those units to be rebuilt in France, and that to me seems like a good idea. And you can kind of see this, again, designed for effect, maybe being like, look, we're conquering Russia. Like, Russia's being conquered, and that's just, convincing more men to join the war effort, and, we are making use of our manpower. Because once you reactivate a fortress, like, that's functionally a step on the board that you don't need a counter for. And if you're at your force pool, counter limit, then that gets really important. So obviously all sides have lost a lot of units here. So as it stands, if Austria were to flip, then we'd have some challenges out into the Far East. But I do think I could afford to get enough units kind of in place to, that's why, like, hey, we've got Prussian detachments. We just send them east and continue to cause problems. And we just make sure that Austria doesn't have very many options to, like, do anything. Because again, France is going to control Austria's production. So Austria is not going to build anything. It's going to get 3 free steps that I think we have to use, but I'll find ways to limit that. Again, the whole idea here being like, okay, we know Prussia and Austria could flip. We're not going to empower them and create units that we would then have to fight. If you're looking for a way to describe that narratively, it's like Prussia and Austria are exhausted at this point. If Britain can flip them, hey, that's great. That's a great distraction, but they are exhausted. And so that will benefit France. If we have to pull out of Russia or whatever the case is, then fine. The other important thing is we're going to do production before diplomacy. So there's a pretty reasonable chance, as I'm looking over things, that Russia's not going to be able to build much at all. And what they're going to build, unfortunately, I couldn't get down here to occupy these forts. They're probably going to put some army in Odessa, alternatively somewhere out here. So, like, this is functionally Russia, but they're going to have so little money. I'm going to have to calculate, out of all of these provinces on the map, which of them, count for how many production points. Because again, Russia is going to functionally lose most of that. So I should also point out that as of the end of this turn, Russia is technically in a conquer state, but they are going to fight on. In terms of the alliance credit system, I haven't updated this in a while. Russia would have sued for peace, but if they had done that, that doesn't count as being conquered, and France wants that to achieve victory conditions. And so they are fighting on. So I'm basically ignoring the alliance credit system at this point, because France doesn't want to peace out. They want to finish the job in Russia for victory condition purposes, and it's more exciting that way. Rather than be at peace and then we kind of wait out the rest of the game, I think it's more interesting to keep going. but that's why Britain doesn't need to spend more money on trying to keep their alliance credit high. They are going to spend money on trying to give Russia cash to rebuild its army, and maybe hopefully influence Prussia and or Austria to join their side. And in fact, if not for the fact that Britain needs to get troops down here to keep the continental system from being a thing, they would just spend all their money doing that. But they're going to have to split up and split the difference. The French also used a weather gauge card to beat the British fleet and had forced them to retreat, and they're now in the Channel, which opens up the possibility of Soult with the Army of the North heading into Britain proper, depending on the chit order. So again, this is just the situation where, like, I do think this is going to end up being something of a French victory. Britain just doesn't have enough money to do what it needs to do, to build what it wants to build, to give money to Russia and try to flip Prussia and Austria. It just doesn't seem like we're going to be able to do that. So 1813 is going to end up being a very important year. So if Russia cannot get out of a conqueror state by the end of summer 1813, then Russia is truly conquered. They're out of the game effectively. And if Prussia and Austria don't flip, then winter 1813, France wins an automatic victory. I think the key challenge there is going to be actually keeping Prussia and Austria allied to France, but that's going to depend on the die rolls with Britain trying to influence them. So I still leaning to be a French-sided game, but we will see what else happens here. Pretty exciting, interesting puzzle to figure out how to deal with the craziness that is Russia and just how bad that attrition is. It just bleeds away everything you have, and you're spreading out units to occupy fortresses, which cost steps, and you're creating detachments or moving detachments around, and that costs steps. It's just a whole damn thing, which is a challenge. So anyway, I'm going to end up doing production off camera and all that, and we'll cover the results of production at the beginning of the next video. But that's it for 1812. We're on to 1813. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Keep gaming.